he's going right across my deck here now. I did not right up in his vicinity, but no, I didn't. So this is good, too. Roger. Thanks for that information, sir, and I'll get back to you if we come up with anything. Over.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name's Tanner. I'll be one of your hosts today, and today I will be joined not by Taylor, by someone else who I will keep secret for the next, 30 seconds. Before we introduce our guest host today, we do have one new patron to thank, so thank you to Jen for joining us over there on Patreon. We have some new stuff coming out on there soon. In the meantime, you have quite a bit of back catalog to catch up on over there. So thank you, as always, for your support. For anyone else listening who's not supporting us on Patreon, every month we put out, you'll get at least one, depending on which tier you sign up for. $3 will get you one episode a month. $5 will get you at least 2 bonus episodes a month. We'd like to branch out, have a little fun over there, covering some different, not always directly shipwreck-related topics. But yeah, it's a good time, and you should check it out. So with that, we'll bring in our multiple-time returning guest host, Kaylee.
What is up? Hey.
How is it going, Kaylee?
Oh, it's going well. What is this, my 3rd episode?
I think it's your 4th.
Oh, yeah, the Halloween one.
Yes, that included the Halloween, because we did, I think, the Benjamin Noble. You were on for one of the Edmund Fitzgerald episodes. Mm-hmm. Halloween and the Thomas Wilson?
Yeah. Sorry, did my mic just pick up the ship horn there?
No, but I hope it did in the recording. I didn't notice it, but that'd be cool.
There's the bridge. It's the Viking Polaris. It's the cruise ship leaving. So that was the answer to my question earlier of why is the bridge up?
Does Viking have multiple ships on the Great Lakes or just one?
We get the Polaris and the Octantis here. So those are the...
Is that the same Viking company that has tours in Europe?
Yeah, the river cruises. And these are actually the same 2 boats that come here, the Polaris and the Octantis. In the winter, they do cruises down to Antarctica.
Wow.
Which is just nuts to think about.
The Vikings have extended their reach over the centuries. I've maybe mentioned this on the show before. The angriest I think that people have ever gotten at something that I said on the podcast actually is nothing to do with Palestine or anything recently. It is when I laughed at the fact that Viking River Cruises is headquartered in Switzerland, which is a landlocked country. And I understand that they have rivers and lakes, but I thought it was funny that a company called Viking is in a landlocked country like Switzerland. Multiple
really
people have made stern comments about why that's not that funny. More important stuff going on here. What have you been up to? Media you've been consuming, or maybe media that you've been producing?
I will just say I've been so busy producing media, I have had so little time to consume much. Mm-hmm. Yes, my new album, my 2nd album, Leading Lady, came out on Monday, June 10th, and I'm just over the moon about it. Like, response has been really good so far. People have been liking it. Mm-hmm. Pretty much all I could ask for. I'm so happy.
It's very good. It's very, very good. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your first album, and I want to say last time you were on, I think you had mentioned that you were either getting close to finishing some stuff for your 2nd album. So
yeah, I think I was about to start it because it was like November through, I think I got done in the middle of April, just random sessions up at Sparta Sound in Sparta, Minnesota, middle of nowhere, Iron Range.
Cool.
Really good stuff.
That's such a cool recording locale.
Yeah, right? Yeah, middle of nowhere. So check it out. It's streaming everywhere if you want to listen to it.
You're supposed to include some mid songs on the album, to go up and down, but Kaylee has decided to just make all bangers. So,
oops.
So yeah, check it out for sure. We'll play a little bit of it at the end of the episode as we fade out at the end. Yeah, for me, honestly, I've been busy with work stuff. It's finals week this week, so I haven't really been doing as much free time stuff. Katie and I have been watching a French series on Netflix called The Forest, La Forêt. We've been watching that, and it's okay. It's one of those series that I would not watch. We would not watch if it was in English. We're just doing it because it's in French. We like to feel cultured. So, getting down to business today, we are finally going to knock out a story that has been mentioned and sort of danced around and hinted at for, I think, literally years at this point. And that is the story of the Lake freighter SS Mataafa.
Woo!
At long last, a ship's name we've heard and referenced before, but finally, this is the star of the show. her moment in the sun, the Mataafa, a ship that has the dubious honor of having an entire storm named after her. And actually, weirdly enough, we have talked about another victim of that storm on an episode already. That was the Madeira, the schooner barge. She was cut loose from the freighter William Edenborn and ran aground on the Minnesota shore near where Split Rock Lighthouse stands today. That was back in episode 84. That was November 2022. And we had Ian on hand to tell us that story. So we're knocking out all of these Duluth area wrecks. My main sources for this, aside from the cool stuff that Kaylee has, was Mark L. Thompson's Graveyard of the Lakes and Al Miller's book, Tin Stackers, The History of the Pittsburgh Steamship Company.
That's such a good book.
I've had it for a bit since last time I was in Door County, and this was the first time I really cracked it open, was to do research for this episode. It's very cool. I want to read the rest of it. So to set things up here, a little bit of background information coming to us from that book. This is a character who will kind of be in the beginning and will kind of just drop off from his story. And that is a guy named Augustus B. Wolven, commonly known as Gus Wolven.
Sick name.
It's very cool. Gus Wolven. Wolven was born in Cleveland, Ohio in October 1857. And 7 years later, the family moved to Chicago. They moved again to Pecatonica, Illinois, which is about 15 miles west of Rockford, which is sort of the middle of nowhere. That was in 1871. Do we know something else that happened in 1871 in Chicago?
Would it have anything to do with a cow that may or may not have kicked over a lantern?
It caught on fire. A lot. Al Miller in Tin Stackers mentions that there's no verified reason, there's no established reason for the move, but timing-wise, it could have worked out that they maybe just lost their home in the Great Chicago Fire.
Good time to leave Chicago.
When it's on fire.
Yeah.
So Gus's father, Benjamin, was a sea captain, or a lake captain. I don't know which. Maybe a little of both.
Little of both.
And that clearly influenced the career that he went into. So quoting here from Miller.
Benjamin Wolven was a vessel master on the Great Lakes, which was a reputable middle-class profession. He worked for the Winslow fleet and over the years commanded the steamers Dean, Richmond, and City of Rome. Reared in a maritime family, it was only natural that Gus Wolven would be drawn to the Great Lakes.
He went to work surprisingly young. Accounts differ on whether he was 10 or 12 when he went to work as a cabin boy aboard his father's ship.
He did well under his father's tutelage, working on the boats when they sailed from May to December and studying during the winters. As he grew older, he began spending the winters studying in Chicago.
So Wolven rose up through the ranks of the Winslow fleet, and in 1879, at just 22, he was named master of the steamer Annie Smith. First of several commands he would hold in the fleet, another one being the City of Rome, one of his dad's old ships. Wolven got married to Carrie Kilgore in 1880, so things are going pretty sweet up until now. In 1883, when Wolven's just 26, both of his parents passed away.
Oh no.
Miller doesn't mention how, but presumably at the same time.
One would, I guess, not hope, but like kind of hope, maybe?
Is the way it's presented, and
yeah.
There's no real reason given, so I don't know, maybe an accident or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that prompted Wolven and his wife to move back to Pecatonica to look after his younger siblings. In Pecatonica, he went into business as a produce merchant, and he was apparently just as good at this as he was with ships. He did this for around 6 years until his siblings were grown, and at this point, he is feeling the call of the lakes once again. So, quoting again from Al Miller.
Rather than renewing his master's license so he could sail again, he and Carrie moved to Duluth, a rapidly growing city at the western tip of Lake Superior. The growth of the mining and shipping industries meant things were happening in Duluth. It was a place where an ambitious man who knew something about steamboats could do well for himself.
Soon after arriving in Duluth, Wolven entered into business with coal merchant Fred LaSalle, with whom he founded the LaSalle and Wolven Vessel Agency. They worked together for about 5 years until Wolven went solo to handle his own client list. In 1895, this business brought him into contact with a guy named James H. Hoyt, an attorney and a representative for the American Steel and Wire Company. The company was looking to have some ships built, but were also looking for someone who could manage a new fleet, something that Wolven was well qualified for.
Good for him.
Things are going pretty sweet, except for both of his parents dying at the same time,
Yeah.
aside from that. Having accepted the role of president, he set about building up the fleet for the new Empire Transportation Company. So just a warning to the listeners, there's going to be like a bunch of company names coming here, like late 1800s, early 1900s. This is just the heyday of companies being established and merging and changing names, changing owners. So there's a few coming here. And really, they don't really matter in the grand scheme of the story we're telling here today.
There will not be a test at the end of the episode.
Yeah. As president of this new company, his first move was to buy the steamer W.H. Gilbert. Next, the Zenith Transit Company was organized to get started with the construction of new vessels. And the first new construction was the Zenith City, which would be the largest ship on the lakes at the time she was built, at a enormous, whopping, gargantuan, for the time, 387 feet.
Not bad, not bad.
Pretty good for the time.
Yeah.
Pretty small now, but hey,
certainly.
They were doing a good job for then.
Yeah.
Subsequent vessels, the Queen City, the Empire City, the Crescent City, and Superior City, were each larger in turn than the one before. Superior City, built in 1898, had a keel length of 429 feet. I was kind of impressed at how quickly they're increasing these things in size.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if the Crescent City mentioned here is the same Crescent City that is also going to be Mataafa stormed later. That is the name of one that was over here.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So we might have another victim here.
Possible.
Wolven ran the operations out of Duluth, pulling in his salary as president and general manager of Zenith, while also having an ownership share in each of the vessels. Not bad. He's doing pretty well for himself.
Mm-hmm.
He is like the Duluth nobility now. Wolven acted as an agent for Pickens, Mather and Company, as well as managing affairs for the American Steel Barge Company's whalebacks in Duluth. We love whalebacks on the show.
Whaleback fan. It seems like he's the only person that works in boat-related anything.
It really seems like you can't really avoid him if you want to do anything with boats in Duluth. So in addition to adding those new freighters, Zenith expanded by rescuing/acquiring the Inman Towing Company.
The Inman line was owned by the colorful Byron B. Inman, who operated a large fleet of tugboats in Duluth and neighboring Superior, Wisconsin. Inman was an astute tugman, but a terrible businessman. Love that phrasing. Oh my gosh. All his tugs were mortgaged. He bought coal and other operating supplies on credit, and he lived beyond his means. The Panic of 1893, followed by two vicious rate wars with competing tug lines, torpedoed his shaky finances and sent him into receivership in 1896.
I kind of wish that there had been a little bit more detail or like a footnote about he lived beyond his means. Like, what was he doing with his money?
He sounds fun, is what he sounds like.
The lavish life of a tugman. Of the astute tugman.
I'd party with Byron.
So enter Gus Wolven and several other Duluth businessmen. They paid off Inman's business debts and got the tugs back up and running, ensuring reliable tug service for the 1897 shipping season.
Very important back then.
Yeah, like this helps them too. If they need to get tugged, they want it to be on demand.
Absolutely.
And this is just a nice thing to do for the guy, right?
Sure, I'm sure there's no ulterior motive.
You got to have a little bit of suspicion. You have the struggling business and suddenly like 5 or 6 local businessmen like, we can help you out here, say.
Yeah.
So in the process of bailing out Inman's company, Wolven and his Confederates had an ulterior motive. In 1899, the Great Lakes Towing Company was formally established under the control of the ship owners. So Inman understands that he's kind of been had at this point, or at least outmaneuvered, with Wolven actually having purchased controlling interest in the Inman tugs early in his involvement with the company. Tin Stackers did not include, or at least in that section, what became of Inman or his company, but for his efforts, Wolven earned a seat on the board of directors with Great Lakes Towing and would serve as a vice president.
He wasn't busy enough.
He's like the president of like 3 or 4 different things right now, and he's like on boards of directors.
I don't think you're allowed to do that.
Yeah, and these are like companies that work together, which like probably is a conflict of interest. I don't know. Rules were different at the time. So in March of 1899, there were 2 ships under construction for Zenith Transit. One of them was named the Texas, the other Pennsylvania. Wolven sold both of these vessels, still incomplete, to Federal Steel with a price tag of $275,000 each, which is significantly more than they had cost to construct. So he's turning a profit on these things. Federal Steel would rename both vessels. Texas would become Malietoa, and Pennsylvania would become Mataafa. So some of that money from the sale of these two ships would go towards construction of 4 more ships. One of them, the William Edenborn. Is the Edenborn, was she involved in...
The Edenborn was with the Madeira, I think.
Is that what it was?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the Isaac L. Elwood also will come back in this story later.
So we have the William Edenborn, the Isaac L. Elwood, John W. Gates, and James J. Hill. All these new vessels approached 500 feet in length, making them the largest ships on the lakes until 1904. In November of 1899, Wolven signed over these Zenith Transit vessels to the newly formed American Steamship Company, concentrating all of the American steel and wire ships under one single owner. So, like I said, all these companies are changing in size and ownership and name and merging with other stuff. We just mentioned Federal Steel. In just a couple years here, that would merge with Carnegie Steel and National Steel to form U.S. Steel. In 1901, Wolven was elected president of the Lake Carriers Association. He's
moving on up, man.
He's just president of everything. So in March of the same year, Wolven was offered the position of general manager of the newly formed U.S. Steel fleet.
He'd be my pick, too.
An offer that, well, yeah, you don't have many options. He has all the jobs.
Yeah.
So he initially turns this down because why would anyone want to leave Duluth?
Exactly.
And he would have to do this. He'd have to move to Cleveland to run this fleet. However, just a few days later, U.S. Steel Vice President James Kaylee contacted him again, saying, okay, you can run the Steel Trust fleet from Duluth. And so really that was the only obstacle. So Wolven said, sure, I've got one more presidency in me. And so one of his first main tasks had to do with marketing, specifically the name of the fleet. Quoting here from Tin Stackers.
Most newspapermen and people on the street were already calling it the Steel Trust Fleet because U.S. Steel was commonly known as the Steel Trust. While that name worked in newspapers and saloons, it struck a sensitive note in U.S. Steel headquarters during an era when trust busting was very much in political vogue.
So he comes in, he's like, hey, I think we shouldn't call it this. This thing that people don't like right now.
Maybe not.
So that's when they decide that the fleet will operate as the Pittsburgh Steamship Company. There might be a company I lost track of in here because in Tin Stackers, in the chapter, he references the Pittsburgh Steamship Company. In the reference section at the end, it mentions her being under the ownership of the Minnesota Steamship Company, which I couldn't find anything else about. So
I've definitely heard of that one. I think that was another one of those many that just eventually got rolled in with Pittsburgh.
Since we are focusing on Mataafa, a bit about her dimensions once she was completed. So she had a keel length of 429 feet, a beam of 50 feet, and drew 25 feet of water. Something of note with the style of her construction, and I don't think anything that has explicitly come up on the show, she's built with what's referred to as a submarine stern. Personally, not the kind of stern I would want on my ship. I would want my stern to stay above water, ideally.
The main issue with whalebacks.
On this, there's no stern deckhouse. It's essentially, to me, it looks kind of like any other freighter. It just does not have a stern deckhouse. It only has the one at the bow, meaning that everything that would normally be in the stern deckhouse, some crew quarters, the galley, stuff like that, is below the main deck. Maybe a contributing factor to some of the stuff that comes up here.
Honestly.
So this brings us to the morning of November 27th, 1905. We are in lovely Duluth, Minnesota, in late November.
Can I pop in a few days earlier before we get into November 27th?
Yes, of course.
So there was also, not nearly as bad, but there was a very bad gale on November 24th, 1905. And that lulled everyone into a false sense of security because kind of the saying among captains was that you're never going to have like two horrible storms hitting back to back. Mm-hmm. So when they got the first rumblings about what would become this storm, they were like, well, we just had that one. Unfortunately, Lake Superior does not care about facts or logic.
You can't have two of them.
No, why would we have two storms?
That is really interesting, and it probably does help to explain what we're going to talk about here. Where, this morning of the 27th, leaving Duluth are a few vessels here. There's the tug F.W. Gillette was setting out with the barge George Herbert in tow. And there were 4 of our steel-hulled freighters leaving. This was the Ira H. Owen, the Harold B. Nye, the Isaac L. Elwood that we talked about before, and the Mataafa. Mataafa is also towing the barge James Naismith, spelled differently, so presumably not named for the guy who invented basketball.
This is the kind of thing that, like, same as the Madeira, when ships were smaller, they would frequently also have a barge, which is just basically another ship that they're towing. Same thing, just to double your load.
So that you have people that you can set adrift in the middle of a storm.
Correct.
Which is what usually happens to them on our episodes.
I feel like it's also kind of important to, like, double note that, like, it is, like, just another ship, because when I first heard this story, thinking of, like, a barge being set adrift, I'm thinking of something that doesn't have an engine or anything. I'm like, oh, so you're killing these people, right? But no, they're fine. They have steering and stuff.
So as all these vessels left Duluth, the lake was reportedly pretty calm with a light wind out of the northeast. So honestly, not bad for a late November day, especially if you've just had your big storm. Presumably there's not a lot to worry about. But despite those placid conditions, there were storm warning flags fluttering in the Duluth morning breeze. And those flags were raised for a good reason, although, like you said, maybe the captains aren't taking this seriously because they've just had one. In this case, there's a severe storm moving eastward from the Dakotas, bringing with it heavy snow. Well, and actually something that has come up before, I don't know if this was the episode we did with Brianna specifically about weather, but the idea that, this is fairly early on in, like, the weather service being a thing. And a lot of people simply, like, there's really not a lot of trust built up. What do these guys know?
That's certainly part of it. There was definitely, like, they would pay attention to them, sure, but at the end of the day, like, a lot of the captains would be like, yeah, you're telling me not to go out there. You've not been out there. I know how to handle it out there.
I've been doing this for 40 years.
And also, I'm going to get fired if I don't move this cargo.
I got to get this. I like my job and I want to keep it. So, quoting here from Mark Thompson in Graveyard of the Lakes.
The snowstorm hit Duluth at 6 p.m. An hour later, the winds had increased to gale strength, blowing at 44 miles an hour. By 6 a.m. on November 28th, winds reached storm levels. Gusts of 70 miles an hour had been recorded, and steady winds in excess of 60 miles an hour were recorded for the next 12 hours. Side note, that's bonkers.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Steady, like, that's like big gusts. Steady 60 miles an hour is insane.
That's a lot. That's a lot of miles per hour for wind. So that morning, the 28th, yes. Would come to be known as the worst 2 hours in the history of shipping in the port of Duluth, which is a lot. A lot of ships come and go from Duluth. That's a big deal. The first ship to struggle its way back into Duluth was the 363-foot steamer R.W. England. While attempting to enter the canal in the heavy seas, the ship's captain thought better of it and turned to head back out into the lake. Not so fast, though. The England got stuck in the trough of a wave and ended up being pushed into the shallows near Superior, Wisconsin, where it was tossed onto the beach by several big waves.
An interesting note with the England, too, is they got shoved. It was still on the Minnesota side, but, like, way far down Minnesota Point. They got shoved down there. The only lifesavers in the area went, oops, we got to get all the way down there, and went across the canal, went all the way down that way. So after this time, there were no lifesavers anywhere near the canal opening, which is important.
Yes, that's going to come up later when we need a rescue.
Yes.
Next up to the plate was the Isaac L. Elwood, one of the ships that had left with the Mataafa. She was only bound for 2 harbors, so just about 25 miles northeast up the Minnesota shore from Duluth. But once she'd arrived, she was unable to enter because of the weather. Spending the night out in that storm on the lake, Captain C.H. Cummings decided to turn back to Duluth for safety of the ship.
2 Harbors is also like it's a notoriously bad place to anchor up there, especially way more so back then because it's like very deep and very rocky, as opposed to when you get down towards Duluth. It's a little shallower and sandier, so even today, frequently when ships are going to be at anchor waiting to get into the dock at 2 Harbors, they'll wait way closer to Duluth and then go up, just because it's way easier, way safer.
Fascinating. The Elwood is approaching the harbor entrance around 1 p.m. on the 28th. Visibility very poor because of the snowy conditions. While attempting to steer down the middle of the canal, the Elwood was lifted and tossed against the north pier, damaging some of the plating on her starboard side. She then careened back across the canal, doing similar damage to her port side. And we said this canal is 245 feet wide. So she's kind of getting thrown back and forth here. Despite this pounding, she did make it through the harbor entrance and is dragged into shallow water by the tugs on hand, where she quickly settles on the bottom.
I think she was around, I think it was like 20 some feet of water that she ended up settling in. So shallow enough, thank goodness.
If my ship is sitting on the bottom, that's where I want it to be. And finally, the star of the show, Mataafa, steaming towards the harbor just after 2 p.m. So we said she had been towing the barge, James Naismith, but the Captain R.F. Humble of the Mataafa had decided to cut the tow loose a couple of miles out from Duluth, intending for the Naismith to drop anchor and ride out the storm. I don't know what the R.F. stands for.
I think it's Richard, I think. I don't know what the F stands for. Say Richard freaking Humble.
Really freaking humble.
Really?
That's what his parents named him.
Beautiful name.
Once freed of this extra baggage, it was go time for the Mataafa. From Mark L. Thompson's Graveyard of the Lakes.
Captain Humble rang up full speed ahead on the engine order telegraph, knowing that he had to get up as much speed as possible if he was going to maintain any maneuverability in the big seas.
With black smoke billowing from her stack, the Mataafa raced toward the long concrete piers. All 24 members of the crew held their breath, including Captain Humble.
All he could do at that point was take dead aim at the center of the canal. The rest would depend on the wind and the waves.
As the Mataafa is coming in at full speed, a particularly large wave lifts her stern up high enough for the bow to actually hit bottom, swinging the stern off to port. So once the stern's back in the water, her propeller catches hold again, and she launches forward, but not through the center of the canal.
Did you see the photo that I attached in the email?
I tried to open it, and I couldn't open it.
Dang it. Okay, I'll find a better file for that tomorrow and send it to you. It was probably just really big. But it's basically a photo of, when you look at a propeller, there's like the middle part, and then you can, like, where all the blades are.
Right.
It's just the middle part, and you can see that all the blades were ripped off of it.
Oh, wait, I might have found it here.
It's an insane picture.
UW-Madison Libraries. Okay, I think I'm looking at the same picture, because it's just
a stub.
Yeah, it's just nubs of propeller blades.
Not what you want to happen generally.
No, you don't get a lot of grip when they're that small. So at this point now she's heading directly for the North Pier. Very little time to slow down or avoid this collision, which does happen moments later. Is it an allision if you hit something that's stationary?
Oh man, I don't know.
I know I've heard that term, and I don't actually know what it means. Yes, I think so. A moving vessel crashes into a stationary object is an allision instead of a collision. But
that's crazy. Anyway. Oh, I would like to say pier-wise, just in case anyone is listening to this and rotating the Duluth Canal in their mind. The South Pier is the pier with the red lighthouse on it, or the lighthouse with the red roof. And the North Pier is the one with the white lighthouse on it. That lighthouse was not there yet. It was actually built after this storm. So when she's hitting the North Pier, there is not a lighthouse on the end of it.
Okay. After that bow impact, the stern swung around to starboard, also smashing into the pier. And here's where she loses her propeller, shearing off the Mataafa's propeller blades in the process. So now pretty much truly dead in the water, Mataafa is carried by the waves into the shallows north of the canal, coming to rest about 600 feet offshore. Quoting once again from Graveyard of the Lakes.
With the Mataafa stranded broadside to the waves, the powerful seas began to break over the ship with explosive force. In minutes, her 2 lifeboats and life raft were ripped loose and carried away towards the shore. Next, the gangway on the starboard side of the engine room was stove in, and water began flooding into her stern.
Here is where that submarine stern kind of re-enters the story, as it's mostly underwater, and there's very few places for the crew to go to escape the wind and waves on this open stern spar deck. Captain Humble and 11 of the other crew are in the forward deckhouse, which is still above water at this point. So this meant that those crew trapped in the stern had, good motivation to try and get forward. That's not super easy, though, given the conditions. So the mate and 2 of the crew managed to make it forward. Oh, actually, before I guess we get into this, do mention at the end, but at this point, ships aren't really designed with the internal passageways to go from
Correct.
To go from bow to stern. So yeah, if you need to get to the other end of the ship, you're going across the main deck. We talked about that in the 1913 storm episode that we did, where yeah, if you're on one of these ships, if you're in the stern and your ship is stranded somewhere, you might as well be on another planet from the other side, because you can't get there, you can't communicate, you don't have power probably or heat. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, those guys in the stern, like trying to get forward, you're literally holding on to like the railing, which is no match for anything, especially not if you're cold and wet.
Everything's covered in ice. Not great. So the mate and 2 of the crew do manage to make it forward, moving carefully, kind of sprinting forward during these lulls between the waves, and holding on tight to hatch combings when the waves crashed over the deck. An engine room fireman trying to follow after them had less success, and he's forced back to the stern after almost getting washed overboard a few times.
Someone did get washed overboard trying to run. It might have been that same guy.
Okay.
I know he tried 3 times and then retreated, and then there was a 4th time that he was washed over.
I know several of them end up getting washed overboard.
Him, I know specifically because there was some of the newspaper articles, they were talking to everybody that got rescued afterwards, and they were all talking about this unnamed fireman who was trying to get from the stern to the front. And there was a quote, which I don't have it specifically, but it was along the lines of 2 guys were like, yeah, we didn't know his name, but he was so jacked. He was so muscular, and that's why he didn't get washed off, but then he eventually did get washed off, but he was so muscular.
Leave the people something to remember.
Exactly.
Yeah. So by this point, Mataafa has been wrecked for about 2 hours. It's around 4 p.m. And one reason that no rescue has arrived yet is what Kaylee mentioned earlier with the RW England. They're busy.
Nice going, guys.
They're rescuing people from one of the other vessels, the England, that has also struggled to get into Duluth. Rescuers would reach the Mataafa around 5. Their first attempt being to set up a Lyle gun and launch lines out for a breeches buoy. If I remember correctly, they tried this a few times, and they kept landing across the deck where, no one in their right mind is going to go out and grab it.
I believe they had 4 unsuccessful attempts before they aborted the attempts.
So, yeah, they get one more out there closer to where it's at least possible, but everything is too cold. Not going to work. They're not able to get this set up.
I do have a quote that kind of demonstrates just how absolutely frustrating this would have been with how close they were to shore. This was a Minneapolis Tribune, November 30th, 1905. A megaphone was secured, and in response to the repeated calls of the lifesavers manned the boat and a handed megaphone and shouted, "All alive forward! Can you get us ashore?" So the captain literally has a megaphone, and they're able to hear him with that. That's how close they were.
That is so frustrating. Because, that highlights, this is not that far away.
Mm-hmm.
Just far enough to be out of reach.
Yeah, there were, as soon as ships started coming in pretty much, or trying to come in, a lot of Duluthians, I have a quote about this that I'll put in later, but started lighting bonfires on the shore, half as a just watching to see what's going on, but also as a, hey, this is where the one side of the canal is. So yeah, people were down there seeing this go down in real time.
I mean, especially a place like Duluth where
whole city was down there.
Where the shipping is such a central part of it. Mm-hmm. So I imagine that is maybe not an attraction, but a draw, definitely.
Oh, for sure.
So they decide that the only real option is to wait for calmer seas and evacuate the men with lifeboats. In the deckhouse, the captain and the now 14 other crew who are forward with him, they're all crammed into the captain. I almost said the captain's humble cabin.
That too.
Maybe, yeah. The Captain Humble's cabin with kerosene lamps for warmth. Thompson notes that most of the portholes were smashed out, which sucks.
Oh, God.
Making it very cold and wet with the spray from the waves still coming in. Around 5 a.m., so now they've been in there for 12 hours crammed.
Yeah, they spent the night.
Spending the night with your boys. So around 5 a.m., a fire is built in the captain's bathtub. a bathtub. I don't know if it was specifically belonging to the captain. Maybe everyone could use the bathtub. Using kerosene, rags, matches, and wood from the bathroom walls. At 7:30 in the morning, and this is the 29th now, I think.
Yes, it was complete. It was overnight that they were out there.
7:30 in the morning, a surf boat is finally able to reach them, and the 15 men in the bow are safely evacuated in 2 trips. Hungry, cold, but alive. Different story in the stern. There were 9 men back there after the 3 had made it forward, only 4 of whom would be found still on the ship. Quoting here from Thompson.
The stern of the Mataafa was shrouded in a cocoon of ice that had gradually built up in the wake of each passing wave, and the 4 sailors were frozen stiff. 3 were found lying on the open deck in the lee of the stack. The 4th, a deckhand, had climbed into one of the ventilators for shelter, and with a hand clutching each side, was peering out towards shore, his sightless eyes and contorted countenance presenting a ghastly sight.
I cut the quote off there, but I'll include it anyway. Because in Thompson, the next line after that is something like, if his eyes still were able to see, maybe he would have seen the storm flags fluttering over Duluth.
Oh, God.
Like, don't taunt the guy. He's dead.
Yeah, you didn't have a choice of that.
It's not his fault.
The death certificates that were issued for the 9 guys that died, they said exposure to cold and waves, and then the contributing factor was shipwreck.
Yeah, I would say so.
Many are saying.
I would say that was part of it. Yeah, I don't like the phrase cocoon of ice. It's not fun. Don't want to be in a cocoon of anything, really.
No.
But ice would not be good. So that's all I have really in the notes about the incident really here.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the Mataafa was raised and she continued on with her career, correct?
Yes, I got that. And I also got what happened to the Naismith at least that night.
We set her adrift and we forgot about her.
Goodbye. Duluth Evening Herald, November 30th, 1905. The barge Naismith, the consort of the ill-fated Mataafa, was brought into port last night by one of the Great Lakes Towing Company's tugs. Great Lakes Towing Company mentioned. Not much difficulty was experienced in bringing her through the canal, for the west wind had flattened the swell out to a considerable extent, and the passage was much more easily made than would have been done in the afternoon. The Naismith does not seem to have been injured by the gale, which she outrode like a duck. She is now lying at anchor in the harbor basin, waiting to be towed down the lakes. So everything was fine for the Naismith.
I do think it's funny that, because like sometimes in these stories, they cut the barge adrift and you never see them again.
Yeah.
No one ever sees them again.
No, those guys were great.
Yeah, here it's kind of the opposite. It's like, yeah, you wish you had spent the night out on the lake with us.
Oh, and I have my, you're going to love this, the quote about the people with the bonfires too. I'm just addicted to the way that old newspapers write anything. And this is also Duluth Evening Herald. And a curious crowd it was, this motley gathering which was so interested in the welfare of the men who were imprisoned for so long on the beached steamer, and who suffered everything but death before they were finally taken off. There were capitalists and horny-handed sons of toil, schoolgirls and wantons, sailors and landlubbers, and all of them pressing about the waiting carriages and the boat, determined to see at least one of the Mataafa's crew. So it was tourism.
Did that say schoolgirls and wantons?
It did. You know, everybody was.
Got all these sluts out here watching the shipwreck.
So love that.
Capitalists and horny-handed
sons of toil.
Sons of toil. I like
the
that.
Horny-handed sons of toil.
So the Mataafa, she ended up going back into service. She was she rebuilt?
Yeah, a couple times. So she actually sat out there that like 600 feet or whatever off the piers until June of 1906 was when they finally were able to bring her in. So I don't know why it took so long. I imagine they had to like fix the crack and all that stuff to get her floating, but recovered in July 1906, taken for repairs, rebuilt for $100,000, presumably sailing again, and then rebuilt again in 1926 in a different way, and then rebuilt again as a car carrier in 1946. So that was her route was carrying, I think, like 500 cars from Detroit to Buffalo was the route for that. So she had like an extra deck built on top, still named Mataafa, which I found interesting because I feel like they usually change the name if that happens. And then retired in 1964 and was eventually taken to Hamburg, Germany to be scrapped in 1966. That was a long life for that boat.
It was, and it's amazing to think that this boat that was, construction started, in like 1899, ends her career as a car carrier. It's
in Germany.
Yeah, interesting that they wouldn't change the name, especially like a ship with that has, certainly for the time, like that level of name recognition, I would think.
It's a whole storm named after it.
Yeah, it's like you'd think you would change the name, but I don't know. And then also, since we did mention this whole storm, I see in your notes here, you included a bit about the storm as a whole.
Oh yeah.
What was so significant? What happened with this whole this Mataafa blow?
Yeah, crazy storm. Like 1905 itself was like the worst year on record on Lake Superior. It was more than 60 lives were lost across the whole year. The Mataafa storm just itself, it was 11 vessels on the North Shore. So like just like Duluth up to 2 harbors further north. The Mataafa blow as a whole, 30 vessels sank or beached or were damaged in some really notable way just between the 27th and 28th. Most of those were on Western Lake Superior, so like our side of the Keweenaw Peninsula, basically. So yeah, it was just a crazy storm that was part of a pretty crazy year in general for weather.
Because like I know in Michael Schumacher's book about the 1913 storm, a significant part of that book is covering the Mataafa storm, because that's kind of like the thing everyone's comparing this to when it happens, because it's so fresh in everyone's mind. Yeah, a really interesting story, and obviously we probably have multiple ships we could talk about from the Mataafa storm in the future. Was that everything you had, I think?
Oh, why did I... This only partially relates, just Mataafa storm at all, and I didn't write down the full quote because I didn't feel it related enough. But since I mentioned the Crescent City earlier on, this is why I remembered it. There was a guy that I read a newspaper article about who apparently, by age 28, he had been in 3 shipwrecks. Who knows, he might have been in more later, but the first one was just like an unnamed one on Lake Michigan that apparently, like, he said it wasn't difficult to get off the boat at all. Like, it was fine. It was easy. Second one, Thomas Wilson.
Oh, okay.
He was fine. And then the third one was the Crescent City. And the Crescent City was one that was, it was really just beached. It still happened, but he had a really, really long quote after they were asking him about this, where he was like, I was in a restaurant and I overheard someone say that it must have been easy to be on the Crescent City. Well, he should have been out there and seen how easy it was. Or no, it was a snap. Yeah, he said it was a snap. He should have been out here to see what a snap it was. It was like 2 paragraphs of this guy being like, I overheard this guy in a restaurant. It made me mad. So I love that guy.
I think that's like a common thing, though, probably. I think a lot of people probably feel like you could survive a shipwreck. It's like, I would be fine on a shipwreck.
If I was there, it wouldn't have gone down like that.
There would have been a lot of blood on that deck. Yeah, I think maybe a bit like a plane crash. Also, everyone kind of secretly thinks like I would be the survivor if that was me. If I was out there, yeah, that would be me.
So lots of rich stories within the Mataafa storm, including that absolute hero.
But that was cool. That was a very cool story. I'm glad we finally gave the Mataafa her due after mentioning her so many times on the show. Yeah, I mean, we'll probably come back to the Mataafa storm at some point. We're kind of trying to recenter a bit, on the Great Lakes for a little bit. We've been further afield doing other stuff for the show, but yeah, we kind of we're ready for some more lake action. I think our listeners are ready for it also. So yeah, this is good to get us back to the lakes that we love so much. Where can people get more Kaylee? Where can they follow you? I know you've already mentioned your music.
Oh yeah, the music's everywhere, and then I guess my general big platform would be Duluth's famous Kaylee, at Kaylee Fabulous on Twitter. I have been recognized at work from this podcast, I think 2 or 3 times now, which is hilarious to be recognized from a podcast. So, hey, if you're in Canal Park, yeah, that's probably me.
In a way, you are the public face of the podcast, because neither Taylor nor I have ever been recognized in public. So,
because I only get recognized because I spend my day standing next to a large Edmund Fitzgerald model, and then people go, "Hey!" But yeah,
that is true.
So fun.
Thank you for joining me here to talk about the Mataafa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time and your research that you contributed to this. Thank you for making a great album. We will play a selection from Kaylee's new album on the way out here of the episode. So with all that, thank you all for listening and take care. We will talk to you again next week.
I'm a friend, not your lover. I'm a lover, not your friend. You look lovely under neon, don't know how to pretend. Suffer for attention and get me another drink. There's no room for affection, waste a day on what you think. There's a place in the park, there's a way through the dark. I don't wanna keep a secret, but I know that I can't stop myself from trying to find answers. And I wanna be invisible, do I make myself clear? I love when people see me and wonder where you are. Didn't I just see him at the bar? I seek and I destroy. There's a screw that I'm missing and I need to draw the line. I'd order you another, but I haven't got the time. I can make myself a jukebox any way I please. Refuse myself a forest, let you pick and choose the trees. Now I'm up against the wall, staring at you like a hawk. This is nothing short of subtle, love to listen to you talk. It's the back of your head, it's in every word you said. What am I still doing here? I love when people see me and wonder where you are. They all know what you did in the car. I seek and I destroy. I love when people see me and wonder where you are. The night is long, I come on strong and I take myself too far. You love when people see you and you stand out from the crowd. Did I just say the quiet part out loud? I seek and I destroy. Seek and I destroy. Destroy, destroy, destroy. I seek and I destroy.